Imagine this for a second. It's 2:13 a.m. You're warm, finally comfortable, drifting into deep sleep, and suddenly your bladder taps you on the shoulder like an annoying alarm clock. You open your eyes, frustrated, already knowing what's coming. You walk to the bathroom in the dark, half asleep, wondering, why does this keep happening to me? And the worst part? When you crawl back into bed, sleep doesn't come easily anymore. Your mind wakes up, your body cools down, and just like that, the night is broken. Now, here's the shocking truth most people never hear. Frequent nighttime urination is often not a bladder problem, and it's not just because of age. According to one of the world's oldest practicing doctors, it's often a silent nutrition issue hiding in plain sight. And today, I'm going to share the top 3 vegetables he recommends to help calm the bladder, support the prostate, balance blood sugar, and finally let your body sleep through the night again. Stick with me because the third vegetable surprised even me, and when used the right way, it can change your nights completely. Now, let's slow down for a moment and talk like real people. If you're waking up 2, 3, even 4 times a night to urinate, you're not alone. Millions of people deal with this every single night, especially after the age of 40. Doctors often brush it off and say, it's normal aging. Or they hand over medication that dries out your mouth, messes with your blood pressure, and still doesn't fix the root cause. But the oldest doctors, those who've seen decades of patients' patterns and long-term outcomes, know something different. They know the body doesn't break down randomly. It responds to what we give it every single day. And one of the biggest influencers of nighttime urination is what you eat during the day, especially the vegetables you include or completely ignore. Nighttime urination, also called Nocturia, usually comes from one or more hidden issues. It can be inflammation in the bladder or prostate, unstable blood sugar that forces your kidneys to dump excess glucose through urine, weak pelvic and bladder muscles that can't hold urine efficiently, or even mineral imbalances that confuse your nervous system signals at night. What's fascinating is that certain vegetables directly target these problems at the cellular level, not in a drug-like aggressive way, but in a calming, restorative way that works with your body instead of against it. Let me tell you about an elderly doctor I once heard speak at a small medical gathering. He was in his late 90s, still sharp, still practicing, still asking patients about their diet before their symptoms. When someone asked him, "What's the most overlooked cause of nighttime urination?" he smiled and said, "People feed their bladder irritation and starve their bladder strength." That sentence stuck with me because that's exactly what most of us are doing without realizing it. Let's talk about the first vegetable he emphasized again and again, especially for men and women over 40. It's something you've probably seen your whole life, maybe even eaten casually, but never used intentionally. I'm talking about pumpkin and pumpkin seeds, especially when the pumpkin is cooked properly. Pumpkin is not just a festive food or something you see in soups once a year. It's one of the most bladder-supportive vegetables on the planet. Pumpkin is rich in beta-carotene, magnesium, potassium, and zinc, all minerals that directly influence bladder muscle control and nerve signaling. Here's why that matters. Your bladder is a muscle, and like any muscle, it needs proper minerals to contract and relax at the right times. When magnesium is low, the bladder becomes overactive and irritable. When potassium balance is off, fluid regulation goes haywire. And when zinc is deficient, especially in men, the prostate can swell slightly, pressing on the bladder and making you feel like you need to urinate even when you don't. Pumpkin addresses all of this gently but effectively. The oldest doctor used to tell patients to eat pumpkin in the early evening, not late at night, because it nourishes the bladder without acting like a diuretic. Unlike watery vegetables that increase urine output, pumpkin actually improves urine retention and control. And pumpkin seeds, they're legendary for prostate health. They contain compounds that reduce nighttime urgency by supporting healthy testosterone metabolism and calming prostate inflammation. Many men notice fewer nighttime bathroom trips within 2 to 3 weeks of eating a small handful of pumpkin seeds daily. But here's the key detail most people miss. It's not about eating pumpkin once and expecting magic. It's about consistency. The body loves routine. When you consistently provide bladder-supporting nutrients, the nervous system stops sending panic signals at night. The bladder relaxes, the urge decreases, and sleep becomes deeper and more restorative. Now let's move into the second vegetable, and this one is especially powerful if your nighttime urination comes with thirst, dry mouth, or a history of blood sugar issues. This vegetable is bitter, and most people avoid it for that reason. But bitterness is often a sign of medicinal strength. I'm talking about bitter gourd, also known as bitter melon. This is one of the most respected vegetables in traditional medicine systems around the world, especially for metabolic health. Here's something most people don't realize. Unstable blood sugar is one of the biggest triggers of nighttime urination. When blood sugar spikes in the evening, your kidneys work overtime to remove excess glucose through urine. That means more urine production at night, even if your bladder is healthy. Bitter gourd works like a natural insulin sensitizer. It helps your cells absorb glucose more efficiently, which means less sugar floating in your bloodstream and less fluid being pushed into your bladder at night. The oldest doctor used to say, if the kidneys are busy cleaning sugar, the bladder never sleeps. Bitter gourd calms this entire process. It contains compounds that mimic insulin activity and reduce insulin resistance. Over time, this leads to steadier blood sugar levels, reduced nighttime thirst, and fewer bathroom trips. But bitter gourd does something else that's equally important. It reduces systemic inflammation. Inflammation irritates bladder lining and increases urgency. When inflammation goes down, the bladder becomes quieter. That constant feeling of, I need to go just in case, fades away. Many people report that after adding bitter gourd 2 to 3 times a week, their nighttime urination drops significantly, even if they've struggled with it for years. Now, I know what you're thinking. Bitter gourd tastes awful, and you're not wrong. But here's the trick the old doctors knew. You don't need large amounts. Small portions cooked properly are enough. And when paired with the right fats and spices, bitterness softens and benefits remain strong. Some people even juice it in very small quantities earlier in the day. The key is timing. Earlier consumption helps regulate nighttime processes without overstimulating digestion before bed. Now let's talk about the third vegetable. This one is incredibly underestimated, especially in modern diets. And when the oldest doctor mentioned it, the room went quiet because nobody expected this answer. This vegetable is cucumber, but not the way most people use it. Most people think cucumber causes more urination because it's watery. And if eaten late at night, that can be true. But when eaten earlier in the day, cucumber does the opposite of what you'd expect. Cucumber hydrates the body at the cellular level. That's different from just filling the bladder with water. When your cells are properly hydrated during the day, the body doesn't trigger thirst and fluid dumping at night. Dehydration during the day often leads to overhydration in the evening, which leads to nighttime urination. Cucumber helps break this cycle, but here's the real magic. Cucumber contains silica and anti-inflammatory compounds that strengthen connective tissue, including the bladder wall. A stronger bladder wall means better urine storage and fewer false urgency signals. It also cools excess heat in the body. In traditional medicine, excess internal heat is associated with nighttime urination, restlessness, and disturbed sleep. Cucumber cools this heat gently, signaling the body that it's safe to rest. The oldest doctor recommended cucumber earlier in the day, often with a pinch of salt or yogurt to enhance mineral absorption. He warned against eating it late at night, not because it's bad, but because timing determines its effect. When used correctly, cucumber trains the body to regulate fluids better over a full 24-hour cycle. Now let's connect all of this because this is where most people miss the bigger picture. These vegetables don't work in isolation. They work as signals. They tell your body that it's nourished, balanced, and safe. When the body feels safe, it stops waking you up unnecessarily. Nighttime urination is often a stress signal, not just a physical one. The bladder is deeply connected to the nervous system. That's why anxiety, poor sleep, and chronic stress often worsen nocturia. The oldest doctor emphasized something that modern medicine often ignores. The bladder listens to the brain. If the nervous system is inflamed, overstimulated, or depleted, the bladder becomes reactive. These vegetables support not just the bladder, but the entire regulatory system behind it. And let me say this clearly because it matters. This is not about restricting water. Many people make the mistake of drinking less water to avoid nighttime urination. That actually makes things worse. Dehydration concentrates urine, irritates the bladder lining, and increases urgency. The goal is smarter hydration earlier in the day, combined with foods that help your body use that hydration properly. Another important point the old doctor made was about evening habits. He noticed that patients who ate inflammatory foods at dinner, like refined carbs, sugar, and excessive salt, almost always struggled with nighttime urination. When those foods were replaced with vegetables like pumpkin, bitter gourd, and properly timed cucumber, nighttime bathroom trips decreased naturally without medication. Now imagine what your nights could feel like if you slept through without interruption. Deeper sleep means better hormone balance. Better hormone balance means improved metabolism, stronger immunity, better mood, and even easier weight management. Sleep is not a luxury. It's a repair state. And nighttime urination steals that repair from you night after night. I've heard countless stories from people who thought this was just their new normal. They accepted broken sleep as part of aging. And then slowly, gently, their nights changed just by changing what they ate consistently. No extreme diets, no supplements stacked on supplements, just intentional food choices that support how the body is designed to function. If you've been struggling with frequent nighttime urination, I want you to hear this clearly. Your body is not betraying you. It's communicating with you. And vegetables, when chosen wisely, are one of the clearest ways to respond to that communication. As you listen to this, pay attention to patterns. When do you drink most of your water? What does your dinner usually look like? How often do you eat vegetables that actually nourish bladder and nerve function versus ones that just fill your plate? Awareness is the first step toward change. And remember, these changes don't have to be dramatic. Even small, consistent shifts can lead to big improvements over time. The body loves gentle signals repeated often. That's how real healing happens. If this conversation is resonating with you, it's because your body is ready for a different approach, one rooted in wisdom, not quick fixes. The oldest doctors didn't rely on trends. They relied on patterns observed over decades. And the pattern is clear. When you feed the body correctly, it stops waking you up at night. So tonight, instead of dreading that inevitable trip to the bathroom, imagine a different night. A night where your body stays calm, your bladder stays quiet, and your sleep stays deep. That future is closer than you think, and it often starts with something as simple and as powerful as the vegetables you choose to eat. When we talk about long-term bladder relief, most people automatically think about the bladder itself, but that's where the misunderstanding begins because the bladder is not an independent organ doing its own thing. It is deeply wired into the nervous system, constantly listening for signals about safety, stress, timing, and readiness. And when those signals are off, the bladder reacts even if nothing is structurally wrong, which is why suppressing symptoms with medication rarely brings lasting relief. It may quiet the bladder temporarily, but it does nothing to address why the bladder is overreacting in the first place. And the oldest doctors understood this because they watched the same patients for decades. They saw that the people who healed were not the ones who silenced symptoms, but the ones who restored balance in the system controlling those symptoms. The nervous system is like the command center of urination, deciding when to store urine, when to release it, and when to wake you up at night. And this system is influenced by stress hormones, blood sugar, inflammation, mineral status, sleep quality, emotional tension, and even breathing patterns, which means nighttime urination is often a signal that the nervous system is stuck in a state of alertness, even when the body should be resting, and when the nervous system doesn't fully shift into parasympathetic mode at night. The bladder stays on standby, ready to empty at the smallest signal. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that waking up to urinate is a purely mechanical issue, like a tank that's too full, when in reality, many people wake up because the brain sends a signal that it's time to go, even when the bladder isn't full. And this is why some people urinate very small amounts multiple times a night, because the issue isn't volume, it's signaling, and that signaling is controlled by the autonomic nervous system, specifically the balance between the sympathetic fight-or-flight response and the parasympathetic rest and digest response. As we age, or as stress accumulates over years, the nervous system often becomes biased toward alertness. Cortisol stays slightly elevated, adrenaline doesn't fully shut off at night, and the brain remains in a semi-awake state, scanning for threats. And the bladder, being a sensitive organ, responds by increasing urgency, because from an evolutionary perspective, the body would rather empty the bladder than hold urine in a perceived unsafe environment, even if that danger is psychological or metabolic rather than physical. This is why people who are anxious, light sleepers, or chronically stressed often experience more nighttime urination, even if they drink very little water in the evening. And it's also why simply reducing fluids doesn't solve the problem, because the nervous system still believes it needs to stay alert. And as long as that belief remains, the bladder will continue to interrupt sleep. Restoring nervous system balance starts with understanding that the bladder needs reassurance, not force, and reassurance comes from stable rhythms, consistent nutrition, adequate minerals, calm evenings, and signals that tell the brain the body is safe to shut down. And this is where long-term relief is built, not through suppression, but through retraining. The oldest doctors often emphasize that the nervous system thrives on predictability, when meals come at regular times, when blood sugar remains stable, when the body receives enough magnesium, potassium, and sodium in the right balance, and when evenings follow a calming pattern, the nervous system gradually stops sounding false alarms, and the bladder follows suit, reducing urgency naturally. Blood sugar plays a massive role in this process, because glucose instability directly activates stress hormones. When blood sugar drops too low at night, cortisol is released to raise it, and cortisol increases urine production while also stimulating the nervous system, leading to wakefulness and urgency, which is why people who skip dinner, eat very light meals, or consume high sugar foods followed by crashes often wake up to urinate, not because their bladder is full, but because their nervous system is responding to a metabolic stress. Supporting the nervous system means ensuring steady fuel, especially in the evening, through balanced meals that include fiber, healthy fats, and protein, preventing sudden drops in blood sugar that trigger nighttime stress responses. And over time, this stability teaches the brain that it doesn't need to wake the body to manage internal crises. Minerals are another overlooked piece. Magnesium in particular acts as a calming signal to the nervous system, helping muscles relax and nerves fire appropriately. And when magnesium is low, nerve signals become erratic, muscles become tense, and the bladder can spasm or signal urgency without sufficient volume, which is why magnesium-rich foods often improve sleep and reduce nighttime urination simultaneously. Potassium works alongside magnesium to regulate fluid balance and nerve impulses, and when potassium intake is insufficient or imbalanced with sodium, fluid distribution becomes inefficient, leading to more urine production at night, and this again feeds into nervous system activation because the body perceives imbalance as stress. Even sodium, often demonized, plays a role in nervous system stability. Too little sodium can increase aldosterone and cortisol, hormones that influence fluid retention and excretion, and this hormonal fluctuation can increase nighttime urination, which is why some people notice improvement when they stop excessively restricting salt and instead focus on balanced mineral intake from whole foods. The timing of these nutrients matters just as much as their presence, because the nervous system runs on circadian rhythms, expecting certain inputs at certain times, and when those rhythms are respected, signals become clearer and calmer, while chaotic eating patterns confuse the system and keep it on edge. Beyond nutrition, sensory input in the evening strongly affects nervous system tone. Bright lights, loud sounds, intense conversations, and constant screen exposure all signal daytime activity, keeping the sympathetic nervous system engaged. And when the brain doesn't fully transition into night mode, the bladder doesn't either, remaining responsive and easily triggered. This is why people often notice that on calmer evenings with dimmer lights and less stimulation, nighttime urination decreases even if nothing else changes, because the nervous system finally receives permission to rest, and when the brain rests, the bladder follows. Breathing patterns also influence this process. Shallow chest breathing activates the sympathetic nervous system, while slow nasal breathing stimulates the vagus nerve, which governs parasympathetic activity. And the vagus nerve directly affects bladder function, gut motility, and heart rate, making it a central player in nighttime regulation. People who habitually breathe shallowly due to stress, poor posture, or anxiety often remain in a low-grade fight-or-flight state, even during sleep, and this state keeps the bladder hyper-responsive, whereas slow, deep breathing before bed can shift the nervous system toward relaxation, reducing false urgency signals. Posture throughout the day and evening can even contribute. Slouched posture compresses the diaphragm and alters breathing mechanics, reducing vagal tone and increasing sympathetic activation, which indirectly influences bladder signaling, showing how interconnected these systems truly are. Emotional tension stored in the body also plays a role. Unresolved stress, worry, or anticipation can keep the nervous system alert at night, and the bladder, being one of the organs most responsive to emotional states, often expresses this tension through urgency, which is why stressful life periods often coincide with worsening nighttime urination. The oldest doctors paid close attention to this connection, often asking patients about their worries, routines, and emotional state, not just their symptoms, because they understood that healing the bladder meant calming the person, not just treating the organ. Sleep quality itself feeds back into this cycle. Fragmented sleep increases stress hormones, which worsen bladder sensitivity the following night, creating a loop where poor sleep causes urination and urination causes poor sleep. And breaking this loop requires addressing the nervous system drivers, not just the bladder output. Even the way a person responds emotionally to waking up matters. Frustration, anxiety, and anticipation of waking again can condition the nervous system to expect interruption, increasing the likelihood of repeated awakenings, while a calmer response reduces the feedback loop over time. Long-term bladder relief, therefore, is not about fighting the body, but about re-educating it, sending repeated signals of safety, stability, and nourishment until the nervous system no longer feels the need to interrupt sleep. And this process takes patience, consistency, and trust in the body's ability to recalibrate. Suppressing symptoms with medication may provide temporary quiet, but it often comes at the cost of dry mouth, dizziness, constipation, and further nervous system disruption, which can actually worsen long-term outcomes, whereas restoring balance addresses the root and allows normal function to return naturally. The body is remarkably adaptive. When given the right conditions, it learns new patterns, and the nervous system, despite years of stress, can relearn how to rest. And when it does, the bladder becomes an ally rather than an adversary, quietly doing its job without demanding attention. People often underestimate how much their daily rhythm influences nighttime symptoms. Irregular meal times, inconsistent sleep schedules, and erratic stress levels all keep the nervous system guessing. And a guessing nervous system prefers to stay alert rather than relax. Consistency is soothing to the nervous system. Waking up at similar times, eating meals within predictable windows, winding down with familiar routines, all reinforce safety, and safety is the signal the bladder needs to stay quiet at night. Hydration patterns also communicate with the nervous system. Steady intake earlier in the day reassures the body that resources are available, while dehydration followed by evening overhydration triggers compensatory mechanisms that increase nighttime urine production, again stressing the system. The goal is not restriction, but rhythm. When the body trusts that it will be nourished and hydrated consistently, it stops overcompensating and bladder signals normalize. Movement during the day influences nervous system tone as well. Gentle physical activity improves insulin sensitivity, circulation, and vagal tone, all of which contribute to calmer nighttime signaling, while excessive sedentary behavior can increase tension and dysregulation. Even exposure to natural light during the day helps anchor circadian rhythms, improving melatonin production at night, and melatonin itself has effects on bladder smooth muscle and urine production, showing yet another layer of connection. All of these factors converge on one principle: the bladder does not need to be silenced, it needs to be supported, understood, and integrated into a balanced system. And when that system is restored, symptoms fade without force. The oldest doctors often said that symptoms are the body's language, and nighttime urination is a sentence, not a typo, trying to tell you that something in the regulatory system needs attention. And when you listen instead of suppress, the message softens. Over time, as nervous system balance improves, people often notice not only fewer nighttime bathroom trips, but deeper sleep, better mood, improved digestion, and more stable energy during the day because the same system governs all of these functions. This holistic improvement reinforces the idea that true relief is systemic, not localized, and that the bladder is a participant in overall health, not an isolated problem to be controlled. Restoring nervous system balance is not an overnight fix, but it is a sustainable one. Each small adjustment builds on the last, gradually shifting the body toward restfulness. And as that shift occurs, the bladder no longer needs to wake you to get your attention. The body prefers harmony over suppression, and when harmony is restored, symptoms lose their purpose, quietly fading as the system finds equilibrium, allowing nights to become uninterrupted, restorative, and calm again. And remember, these changes don't have to be dramatic. Even small, consistent shifts can lead to big improvements over time. The body loves gentle signals repeated often. That's how real healing happens. If this conversation is resonating with you, it's because your body is ready for a different approach, one rooted in wisdom, not quick fixes. The oldest doctors didn't rely on trends. They relied on patterns observed over decades. And the pattern is clear. When you feed the body correctly, it stops waking you up at night. So tonight, instead of dreading that inevitable trip to the bathroom, imagine a different night. A night where your body stays calm, your bladder stays quiet, and your sleep stays deep. That future is closer than you think, and it often starts with something as simple and as powerful as the vegetables you choose to eat.